That video gives me chills every time I see it. Hi guys, absolute pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Glex organisers. I want to thank the Explorers Club, expanding Portugal Space. I absolutely love coming back to Lisbon every chance I get. This is one of my favourite cities. And it's also good to see so many people from ISU. I am an ISU alum myself, SHSSP 19 and MSS 20. So good to see you all. Congratulations on completing week 1 of your journey. And if you feel like you've not slept, get used to it. It's going to get worse. We're Axiom Space. We are building the world's first commercial space station. As many in the room may know, we've got a beautiful piece of equipment up there, which is the International Space Station. It's been operating for decades. And it's getting old, it's getting tired. Like any piece of machinery that's been running non-stop for that long, as you can expect, the maintenance costs are getting very high. And the member parties who have constructed the ISS are not looking to replace it. This is where we come in. So Axiom Space is building the first commercial space station, building the infrastructure, as was mentioned in some of the earlier talks, for the likes of the people in this room to come in and bring you amazing ideas to see what we can do with microgravity. We are also launching the first commercial missions to the space station, including one earlier this year where Michael López-Alegría recently commanded the first fully private mission to the ISS and safely returned, which is most important. So with that, I want to introduce my colleagues on stage, and I'm then going to ask them a few questions. We're then going to throw it open to you guys. So start thinking of any of the tricky questions that you've ever wanted to ask about Axiom, about living in space. First up to my right, Commander Michael López-Alegría, 4-time astronaut, right? 5-time. I knew I should have got you on Wikipedia. 5-time astronaut and the commander of our recent mission to AX-1, to the ISS, and many other qualifications in your long history. And Tejpaul Bhatia. Tejpaul is our Chief Revenue Officer for Axiom and is in charge of driving what the future economy in space looks like as far as Axiom is concerned. So with that, Michael, MLA. You've recently returned from the ISS after having been there many, many years previously. How did it feel going back there as a commercial astronaut versus your time with NASA?
Similar and different. The similarities were sort of the look and feel and sense of the place. I mean, it had changed a lot. I last flew 15 years ago, and so the ISS itself is more than twice as big. The crew back then was 3, now it's 7, plus we 4 were 11. It seemed very, I don't want to use the word cluttered, but busy. Lots of experiments everywhere, cables. That was a little bit different when I was on board again. It was mostly still being constructed, so it was rather primitive in that regard. Different because we had a different mission. I would say, the 3 private astronauts, Larry, Eitan, and Mark, each brought a suite of experiments that they were going to conduct that they, in turn, had sort of recruited from institutions familiar to them. And so we had an incredibly challenging and busy timeline, which we started on day 1. So I feel like I had a little more responsibility, sort of paying attention to what they were doing as well as what I was doing, which was a little bit different because when you're a crew of 3 and everybody's a trained professional astronaut, they're kind of off doing their own thing. This was a little bit different in that regard, but some of the familiar things never changed. The sense of microgravity, the view out the window, I think Matt used some great words which were extraordinary and surreal. Those are wonderful adjectives for what it's like to be in space, and that certainly was no different this time.
Amazing. And I apologize, I didn't introduce myself earlier. So my name is Simon Jenner. I'm the private astronaut recruiter for Axiom. So my role is to search the world for those individuals who want to go on our future missions, commanded by Michael or one of our other talented astronauts. Tej, next question for you. How do you think the success of the AX-1 mission has really contributed to the possibilities? What possibilities have opened up for research organisations and for future applications for microgravity?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Manuel, Portuguese Space Agency, for having us. I think most important is that Michael came back safely. So opens up opportunities for him to go up again. But no, I think everything changes. You know, what we proved with this first mission, being the first commercial mission, all civilian mission going up, is A, we, a private company, can do it. B, we can work with the governments, and do it properly and safely and show that partnership. And you mentioned the research and science experiments, but a big part for me as chief revenue officer is the business experiments, the economic experiments. You know, we know what it costs, and I'll talk a little bit about cost. I think the previous speaker spoke about that. And we ran some real interesting business model experiments up there. Can we create value? Can we create a forward store of value? Can we actually create a sustainable economy up there? And the answer is yes. Do we lose money? Yes. But we are a venture-backed company, and it proves that we can do it, and I fundamentally believe that we will do it in the next decade. And when I say do it in the next decade, I believe you will see us as a trillion-dollar company. You will see other space companies as trillion-dollar companies. We talked a lot about the internet earlier. When people want to hear me say stuff like that, they think I might be crazy. But the biggest companies in the world right now are trillion-dollar market cap companies. They didn't exist when I was in college. And I know I look a lot younger than I am, but my former employer, Google, Amazon, these companies just weren't there. And what I think we proved is we will be one of those companies in a faster time than they were. And you mentioned infrastructure, Rafael, is that your name? Before, how many of the first infrastructure companies are bankrupt now. And it was the application companies, which is very true, and there's other infrastructure companies, but look how much infrastructure the application companies have built, right? Look how much money Google spends on fiber. Look how much Amazon spends on data centers for AWS. They needed that infrastructure for their business, yet they fractionalized it to allow companies like Uber and Netflix and all these other ones that we wouldn't have thought of 20 years ago to exist. So I don't even remember what your question was, but yes.
That's all right.
That was, I don't know.
The next question is for both of you. And we have a bunch of people in the room here from very different, diverse backgrounds, different cultures, different nationalities, all of which have a shared passion for space. So, a tricky question. What do you think the qualifications are going to need to be for someone to go to space in a decade? What type of roles, what type of trainings will they need?
So it was a question to go to space or work?
To work in space, go to space and work in space.
Do you want to give the expert answer, and then I'll make something
I think the irony is it hasn't changed. The answer hasn't changed. For me, the number one qualification, and I'm going to interpret that to mean to be an astronaut, to go to space, is to be able to work well as a team. Work well with your teammates, and that by far, in my view, trumps anything else. We need smart people. We need fun people. We need funny people. We need people that are, educationally diverse. Absolutely. But the most important thing, and I'll tell you that when I was at NASA, I sat on a couple astronaut selection boards, and we would bring in a candidate, and the group, the board was 12-ish people, 8 of us astronauts, some managers, and when the person left the room, the first question to each other was, would you want to fly in space with that person? And invariably, it's how the person came off. I mean, we asked a lot of technical questions. Nobody was fact-checking. We were really looking to see how the person related, which gave us an idea of what kind of a human they were, and I think that's important.
I like the fact that you said fun and funny.
Not necessarily the same thing.
Not necessarily.
I said, we'll be successful in 10 years, or we'll be a trillion-dollar company in 10 years. There'll be multiple trillion-dollar companies. and that goes to our vision of humanity living, working, thriving in space. So a very short answer is I don't know, but I think there'll be several roles. As we figure out what those applications are, those skill sets will drive that. Well, I'll reverse your question a little bit for the audience, the ISU students, is what skills are needed to work in the space industry now? And I won't speak for my other colleagues, but I want to introduce Audrey, who is on our team as well. Simon, you know Mike. The reason, thank you. Yeah. She deserves the applause, but the reason I pointed her out is not for the applause, but if you look at Audrey, Simon, and myself, for me, today's my 1-year anniversary at Axiom. Zero aerospace background before, passion since I was 3 years old. But what I pointed out Audrey and Simon because I've noticed within Axiom, there are several people that don't have your traditional background for aerospace, but I can unequivocally say they're the only person on the planet right now with the experience they have, right? And that's an amazing feeling to look around our company. And that wouldn't have been true before April 8th, or April, whatever day you came back. But at April 8th, it was already true, but when you came back safely, we were all part of something that nobody in human history has been part of. And in my story, when I joined, when I decided I wanted to work in space, I spoke to an investor. I'm also an investor in Axiom. That's how I got my start. But I met this space investor, and I walked into the meeting and said, I want to work in space. But I'm not a billionaire, and I'm not a rocket scientist. And he says, okay, well, good that you know that you're not, well, you're not, but there's a lot of white space in between. So figure out what your value is, go find the companies and invest in it. So my very long, short answer is, there's obviously the engineering, the astronaut, and the billionaire skill sets that we need, but there's a lot more, particularly pointed out by the three of us right now as more missions go up.
Something you said created a spark for me, that some of the roles in space are going to be skill set driven. Now, what we've seen from the history of astronautics so far is that whatever the background, the astronauts need to be generalists. They need to be able to undertake multiple roles. They need to be able to perform tasks which are outside their training. And in my opinion, I think as we grow a human presence in space and we start getting from 13 people in space up to 30 to 100 and grow further and further, just like in situations on Earth, we're going to see a lot more role specializations. We're going to see people who are going up there, to do the engineering, but also people who will be up there with a specific role of cleaning, with a specific role of other types of maintenance, guest services in space. And I think most of these jobs which we're thinking about, which are going to happen in space, have just not been created yet, and probably won't be created at least for the next decade. But just like we can't imagine all the types of research and benefits we can get out of microgravity, we can't imagine all those roles yet.
Yeah, I'd like to pull on that a little bit. I've been thinking about this, listening to some of the previous speakers, and I think when you think about what I call human spaceflight, I'm not going to call it exploration because all of this isn't really exploration, but human spaceflight is not what it was in Mercury or Gemini, Apollo, or anything. It's very different now. And I think you could put it in a few bins. One of them is research, but even within that, there's research from what I would call very theoretical and to many non-scientists not interesting, origin of the universe, things like that that have no real specific concrete application on Earth, and I'm sorry, Jim, if I'm offending you, to, how do I produce a process that will be repeatable so I can make fiber optic cable more efficiently than I can on Earth. So, that's all research. It spans from the theoretical to the very practical. There is going to be use of that technique or process to manufacture cable. In other words, manufacturing is another huge thing that we haven't touched yet. Human history or human spaceflight in history to today has stopped at this boundary between research from some kind of fundamental level to a fairly advanced practical level, but has not gone beyond that. We've never made anything for profit in space. We've never exploited We've never well, I guess we have made a movie there. It's not been released yet, but we understand the Russians have made a movie on board the International Space Station. Oh, sorry, Richard, my apologies.
It's only 5 minutes, it's a movie.
So there are a lot of things that, as we've been alluding to with the internet analogy and all that, we haven't even thought about yet. So all of these roles, you're 100% right. And we need people to drive the ship still and to turn wrenches and the other things that you said about customer experience and maintenance and all that. So I'm completely on board with that.
Well, what I'd add, Simon, is, you know, our AX1 crew, obviously Michael, we knew would be successful up there, but our AX1 crew showed that, to your point, the astronaut can be very versatile. They did science experiments, research that, you know, someone with a biomedical PhD might need to do, right? You know, what I would say is a little different in, I'll make an assumption on what I think the first $1 trillion market is. You're hearing me say the word trillion a lot. It's by design. It's my one talking point. Do you know Alex McDonald, the chief economist? He said in a panel once, he's like, I don't know if there's any economics behind what you say, but if you keep saying it, people will start believing it. So I think there's some theory there. But I'll go out on a limb and say what I think that first $1 trillion market is going to be. And I think it's going to be data centers. I think it's going to be cloud computing. It is my background. I have a very biased focus on it. I was at Google before. I was a startup founder. 3 companies, all built on the cloud. Could a generalist astronaut swap out a hard drive in a data center? Absolutely, right? The difference is the reason for a specialist to go up there will be very different. This gets back to the point of cost. It's not going to be like the cost to swap a hard drive is a cost of a mission. The flip, and this is what I'm encouraging all companies to think about, is it's not about the cost of the mission, it's not about the profit of the mission. It's the enterprise value of that mission. Mm-hmm. If we're putting up a data center or servers up there that are going to generate billions a year in revenue, we'll send one up every day. And then do you need the astronauts on the station to be inserting them? Maybe. Maybe there's better things for them to do, and the 4 people on that mission are 4 of us, people that normally wouldn't have access, but can be trained to swap out a hard drive.
So I like that. Maybe stick with you, Tej. So Michael spoke about a couple of the types of manufacturing that can be done in space, and you've spoken about data centers. With commercial space stations like Axiom Station existing and us going past just the research phase, I mean, keeping that, but also having additional services, what else do you see low Earth orbit and commercial space stations being used for?
Yeah, so this is another talking point, Michael, you've heard me say many times. So you heard me say trillions, you heard me say, I don't know. And I say that all the time, and it is true, because I don't know. And anyone who tells you they know, and I just told you it's data centers, so take it with a grain of salt. We don't know. And we're in that experimental phase. And I think we will find out what they are. And I'll give you some general, I think we all know what the general themes are. Manufacturing, we talk about pharma, bio, data, comms. At the high level, I think where it really starts becoming real is when corporations start coming to the table as well and start doing meaningful business experiments, technical and scientific experiments as well, but really where they have to go to a Fortune 100 CEO has to go to his or her shareholders and say, I'm going to spend 60 million, 100 million, 200 million to go take a server up there. They're going to have to justify why they have to do that. Yeah. So I think we're going to see we'll learn what the real first verticals are once corporations start proving out. And I think we provide that. We, Axiom, and also the governments, we talked about this earlier with the team from Portugal, that if we bring all of industry into this, not just your typical aerospace, but tangential, automotive, aviation, high tech, and even further out, food and beverage, apparel, whatever, we'll start to identify those. And I think we'll do it in the next decade.
Yeah, I would add to the, the spectrum of activities in human spaceflight. One thing that we didn't talk about is the experience. So I would make the argument that NASA astronauts, nor ESA, nor anybody else, were sent there for the experience. Believe me, there was work to be done, and we were sent to do that. Not to say that we don't get that experience, but that is the purpose of the trip. And I would say that the other 3 AX-1 astronauts while they had a lot of work to do and they did a lot of research, that was part of their experience. They looked out the window and that was amazing, unparalleled in terms of experience. But also crunching on the timeline and being behind and calling the ground and asking for help, all that stuff is what makes spaceflight, at least so far, what human spaceflight is all about. So I think that is an area that we shouldn't forget, is that experience, and that should be near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely.
Since it's your job.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. Do you think your AX-1 crewmates had their expectations met with this mission? Maybe what were their expectations going in, and how do they feel on the way out?
They wanted to have an out-of-this-world experience, and they did. I'll be frank and say, so for those who don't know, we were supposed to be a 10-day mission, a day to get to the ISS, 8 days aboard, a day to get home. And the first part was true, a day to get to the ISS, but we couldn't come home because the weather wouldn't support it, the winds and waves in the landing site. So we extended, and we extended from 8 to 15 days on the ISS. And the reason I bring all that up is, as I mentioned before, our time was very busy, and the crew were completely consumed with doing the stuff that they needed to do, which invariably takes longer, even for very experienced, professionally trained astronauts, not to mention inexperienced and trained for half the time as a normal professional astronaut. We also didn't build in enough time for acclimatization to get used to the microgravity environment. So you combine all that, and we were pedaling pretty hard for quite a while. And it was only because we were delayed that they got the second half of that experience, which is seeing the Earth from 400 kilometers at 25,000 feet per second. And that is what I think would make them answer yes to the question about whether they were satisfied.
Amazing. Do we have any questions from the audience? We have lots. Okay. Maybe let's start over here on the right, or your left.
What is the value add of having data centers and servers in space as opposed to the Earth's surface?
So you have two choices, or one choice. I can tell you trillion, or I can tell you I don't know. That's a joke. I'll give you, Amazon recently announced they sent an AWS computer up on AX-1. Obviously, we've known that for a while. They took it up. We waited to make sure it was successful before we announced it. There are several value adds of data center not being on Earth. One is, what if something happens here, right? And to the data centers, and it has happened. You know, I'm from New York. After September 11th, 2001, the backup plan was to move everything to New Jersey, right? Then cloud came about. So having a redundant backup storage up there, maybe it's a replica of the cloud, maybe it's just another node, another region, who knows? Second is all the data services that are compute services, processing needs that are up there in space. It's much more efficient to do it up there than to send it back down here, right? So whether it's an IoT device, a voice assistant, or photos being analyzed, having that edge processing up there, or having the processing capability up there, all of a sudden frees up the bottleneck of data coming down right now. So we were talking about photos and satellite imagery. Does the customer really need to see every high-quality JPEG of every container or every pirate ship? No, they want insights. And that could be a coordinate when something changes. Does all that data have to come down? Now, where I get really excited is as we go beyond low Earth orbit, right? The technology that's going to be needed to replicate the internet, the cloud, as we go out there, the latency, the redundancy, the orchestration. I don't know if there's any DevOps nerds here, but it's going to be a whole other field of IP that's going to come out of this. And just the distance from here to Mars is going to require us to invent new things for comms and data access up there.
Thank you.
This here.
Hi, what is your approach to the nationality factor? I know that you guys deal with Israeli citizen, but like, future? Like you also mentioned that your experience, how you transition from Google to Axiom, but maybe we are taking for granted the nationality factor. Like you are American, it's easy to transition it, but what about the other nationalities that doesn't have an active space program and of course want to be part of this?
So I have a wonderful answer for that, and I think it's, you know, providing access to everyone, which is our mission, but I think you're more qualified to answer this than me.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with the question because as a private citizen, I won't say it doesn't matter what your nationality is. Right, from the private astronaut market is based on being self-funded. But we do offer private astronaut missions to governments as well, and that's probably where a little bit stricter filter would come in. I could say pretty plainly that if you're North Korean, you're probably not going to fly regardless of which private or government, but it's inclusive. Is that what you said?
It's not inclusive.
No. Let's be. I mean, this is not a secret. It's extremely expensive. We talk about we're democratizing access to space. It's not very democratic, but we have to start somewhere, and that is our intent. And I think most people who've been following commercial space for a while believe that eventually launch costs, which have come down significantly already, will continue to come down, and frequency of use, reusability, other players in the launch market, all that will contribute. And at some point, and I hate to trot out this line that I've used in a lot of different fora, but it's a bit like commercial aviation was a century ago, when only very, very wealthy people could fly, and now, you know, people are jumping on an airplane to go to lodges to go to a conference. So it is attainable. What does the scale of that curve look like? I don't know, to quote Tej, but I think, you know, it is a reasonable expectation that the price will come down, and someday it will be accessible to many, many people, much more than they are today.
Okay. Over here.
Sent the microphone over there for this woman.
Okay, cool.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for sharing. Very, very insightful. I had a question regarding cooperation. You're putting a space station into orbit, so are other companies, and so are governments. And obviously it's a commercial one, so by its nature there's a competitive aspect. Outside of a competitive commercial context, do you see any cooperation occurring with any other space station operators, especially if they might be government ones or state ones? Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I can take the commercial side of it. I don't really know enough about on the government side. Someone mentioned, maybe it was you, Rafael, again, about the 4 CLDs, commercial LEO destinations. There's Axiom and 3 others. And by design, Axiom is first to prevent a gap in low Earth orbit presence, and by design, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the other 3 are to foster competition, right? So it is to build an economy out there. And this is a debate I often have at panels, is whether there's even a market. You'll hear people say pent-up demand. And again, I'm not a great economist by any means, but if we're going to use the word demand, let's really see if there's a market here. And people say, yeah, there's billions of dollars. Remember my other keyword, trillions, right? So the orders, and all of us have to be that. So orders of magnitude different. With the other stations, I can say, you know, we cooperate, we communicate, we compete as well. We definitely do, but with the CEOs of those other companies and leadership, I think most of us are in the mindset of what I'm going to quote Dylan Taylor from Voyager, grow the pie mentality, right? There's more than enough pie for everyone. And if we start slicing it up and competing about areas we don't know about yet, we're just limiting everyone. So my opinion is it's very cooperative and competitive at the same time, as it should be. That's only on the commercial side, though.
And on the government side, I mean, we're already cooperating with NASA and ESA to some degree, and with JAXA for training, et cetera. So that's already underway. Now, at some point, they will become our customers, right? So if you want to call that cooperation. And just to pull on what Tej said a second ago about being competitors, but competimates, if you will. You know, I came from the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, where we were advocating as a group for the common agenda. So we had Blue Origin and SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and a lot of other companies in the room who were very much competitors, But there are certain things that they all wanted. They wanted a favorable regulatory regime, for example. So there are things that we will work together on because it is in the common good, and the rising tide will float all the boats.
To add to that, so whilst Axiom is building a station, Axiom Station, we've also announced that we are building on behalf of a third-party company an entertainment module. So that's going to be a module which is owned by a separate entity. There's also nothing stopping us by having countries join onto Axiom Station as well with a module or two of theirs. We can continue to grow this station as large as we need it with as many partners as we need. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Logan?
Hey, Logan with Logistics, but I wanted to mention you guys use digital innovation to give people access to the launch, these commander patches, etc. Was that successful, and do you think you'll continue to use this type of digital innovation in the future to give people access to launches, the experience?
Great. Well, nice to meet you, Logan. Person. He's an owner of our NFT. So when you talk about digital innovation, we launched an NFT platform. Mike LA took the first NFT, I have it on my watch, from the station. And up until the mission, I think, if you don't mind me quoting you, you said you don't care if you ever hear those 3 letters again in your life.
In that order.
Up until Christmas Eve, of last year, I was very much against, not NFTs. I actually really believe in that as a testing ground for the store of future value. We're sending 4 people up to space, our friends. It was just too much of a distraction up until Christmas Eve. And then Santa came. And I flew in on a red eye, guys, so I'm overcompensating. No, but then what happened on Christmas Eve is a little bit of a market developed for partners who wanted to work with us to launch our NFT platform. And the first step was working with NASA to get them to be okay with it. And there was a published policy against it. So this was already a big hurdle. And it's like, do we really have the time with all the stuff we have to do? And I started to realize that there's an opportunity for us to open access to the community, to really be a part of this mission in a way that wasn't possible before. And was it a success? Yes, right? So first, I believe NASA would say we were a great partner on it. Second, technically it worked. We had no way to test it. Mike had a procedure. He went up there. I was in mission control. It was like 3 a.m. Axiom mission control, and I was just watching the server logs, and I was like, is he going to push the button? And I was like, maybe he did push it. It didn't work. And then we got the video of you. So whoever bought the NFT actually has a video of Mike confirming that he did it.
It's another role for a future astronaut, by the way.
What's that?
Launching NFTs.
Yeah. So second, it worked. Technically, it worked. Third, it made money. It made it like I can't go into details of our overall business deal, but the business deal is good for Axiom. But we sold digital items, right? This is a photo that was taken from space. Those patches we created, and it definitely showed we could store value moving forward. Could we 10x on AX2? I think so. Could we 10x on AX3? Yeah. And then now we're talking about a point we're subsidizing flights, right? We're really doing now. Will we do it again? Yes, I believe so. We will. And we can talk about this after. Where I think we could have done better is bring that community in more and have them have more input into the mission, but we didn't know that on AX1. We know that for AX2. So what you'll see over the next several months is us building up that community, which isn't huge, right? Some of those, there was a $20 NFT, but then there was thousands of dollars, right? So you're talking about not a huge community, but this community will actually have input and say in future missions.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me on stage. And
Well done, Simon.
with that, are we done and go to cocktails?
Should we make an announcement about